Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we have a brand new deal in the world of Palantir. And it's a new deal, but it's a deal that's building on an existing partnership that was announced in May of 2022. Yesterday, we talked about the Titan contract. And one of the things I said in that video is I think a lot of people probably forgot about the Titan contract because it was one of those things that was announced back in June of 2022. But if Palantir is able to get it, it's a $1.5 billion contract over the course of 5 years from the Army. Now, this is another thing I think a lot of people forgot about. Back in May of 2022, Palantir and Trafigura announced a collaboration to deliver supply chain carbon emissions, or a platform to be able to monitor supply chain carbon emissions in order to help commodity companies that are dealing with raw goods, measure the extent of their carbon emissions. Reading a very quick part from this PR back in May of 2022. This project marks the first time Palantir will go to market with a partner on carbon emissions tracking. Leveraging Trafigura's expertise in global commodity supply chains, Trafigura is a commodity company, Palantir's Foundry operating system will be configured to provide consortium partners with an accurate calculation of carbon intensity across supply chains, beginning with crude oil and refined products and concentrates and refined metals. Now, why is this super important before we get into the new announcement that was put out today? The renewable energy market that we're going to explore in a little bit is a very big market. And outside of the pure solar panels or wind and like the raw commodities that are involved in terms of making that market, the overall goal for society, the way we are trending, is that we want to have more information, wait for it, data on what's being used and what's not being used, especially in supply chains. I mean, it was basically like in the 70s, right? When you can get away with making a car that has 10 miles, 12 miles a gallon. Now you have fuel mileage limits or certain thresholds because, you know, we want to have cars that are doing 40, 50 miles a gallon because we don't want to be spewing out all this carbon emissions anymore because of things like climate change. So as a result of that, you know, this bottle, what are all the supply chain commodities and carbon emissions that are involved in the overall supply chain of making a bottle like this and all the plastic that comes with the cap and the packaging and all that type of stuff. That is what a company like Trafigura specializes in, and the data that they're able to input within Palantir's Foundry, which is the whole point of the partnership back in May of 2022, was to enable every company in the world that has some type of supply chain with raw commodities, which to make stuff, you have to have raw goods. So there are thousands of companies that specialize in this stuff, a lot of them in China, to be able to figure out ultimately what are the extent of your carbon emissions. The renewable energy market is very big. This is a growing thing that's happening in the overall world in terms of the data that is needed. And obviously it's a big data problem. Palantir can synthesize that data in a meaningful way. Today, APEC, Trafigura, and Palantir launched the carbon emissions platform for the energy sector. So it's building on the partnership that they launched back in May of 2022. And this is specifically in Asia, in Singapore. So let's read a little bit from here. Global trading house Trafigura and U.S. software developer Palantir Technologies on Wednesday announced a platform to calculate carbon emissions in supply chains for the energy sector. The Agora platform, which was the name of it, enables collaboration on carbon emissions information and carbon intensity benchmarking and analysis, the pair said in a joint statement. The launch comes at a time when the emerging carbon industry is still plagued with the lack of clarity and transparency in data. And if Palantir can offer transparency, clarity, actual relevancy to what you're doing with the data, you can make better decisions. And not only can you make better decisions, you can make decisions that don't harm the environment, which from a business use case, from a bottom line for companies, is a good thing. Every airline, every auto manufacturer, they're trying to figure out how do they reduce their emissions and ultimately how that helps them save money. The partners first created the platform for the metals industry last year. So in June or in May 2022 is for the metals industry, not for the energy sector, and have now extended it to the energy sector with first users including oil majors such as BP and Ecopetrol and Trafigura itself. BP, obviously a Palantir client, so it makes sense that BP is using it. The companies will explore ways for the standardization of the carbon intensity reporting and developing reporting methodologies. We believe that the carbon intensity as a commodity specification can enable greater visibility of low carbon alternatives, says Ben Lucklock, the Trafigura's co-head of oil trading. That makes a lot of sense. If you can specify how carbon intensity as a commodity enables the visibility of other alternatives that are not as rich in carbon, then boom, you have other industries that are able to offer energy that don't also have that many carbon emissions. A lack of standard methodologies and access to transparent data are some of the key hurdles in carbon accounting. Juan Carlos, one of Ecopetrol's global head of crude and oil carbon trading, says the first issue is too much data analysis paralysis. There's a standard from the methodology perspective as there are many standards to be used, but none of them is a one-size-fits-all due to the complex value chain, he told the forum. Look, this is really exciting as a Palantir shareholder. This is not a PR that's necessarily going to move the stock. This is not a PR that's going to, drive it up 6, 7, 10% or whatever it may mean. But again, as a long-term investor, these are the partnerships that I salivate over. Like, these are the partnerships that I love to see, because essentially what I'm getting here as a Palantir investor, and then we're going to take a look at the renewable energy market in a second, because I have some interesting charts on that, is you want to see Palantir solving the largest problems in the world. What are the largest problems in the world? Well, one of them, obviously, healthcare, and we're seeing a lot of good progress Palantir is making in the healthcare space. The NHS deal is coming up in about 2 weeks. Hopefully, we're able to get that deal. On top of that, you want to see them tackle energy. If they're able to really tackle the big data problem that is climate change, which is a multi-trillion-dollar problem, there's a massive TAM that Palantir is able to capture off this. So what is Trafigura? I mean, before Palantir even partnered with them, I'm sure most people didn't know what Trafigura is, but Trafigura is a company that's saying, okay, as a commodities trading house, we are going to be able to make sure we can measure all the carbon emissions in every part of the value chain, which is incredibly complex, incredibly detailed. Data is coming from massive amounts of silos just for one part of one organization. Forget an entire organization, or forget a complex supply chain within many organizations. What if we could create a platform with some software players like Palantir, because Trafigura is not a software company, but Palantir is, to be able to launch something to really bring relevancy, transparency, and clarity to the data that we are generating? How valuable is that over the long term as this becomes a more pressing market? If we look here, the global renewable energy market, and this is by Grandview Research, was valued at $1.1 trillion in 2022. It's projected to grow at a compounded annual growth rate, or a CAGR, of 16.9% from 2023 to 2030. Why? The shift towards low carbon fuels and the presence of stringent environmental regulations in most of the developed countries have provided a major boost to the renewable energy sector. The energy generation market has witnessed growth in terms of installed capacity of renewable sources in the past few years in the account for growing environmental concerns, coupled with the pressure to reduce the harmful effects of greenhouse gas emissions. Whether we like it or not, whatever you ideologically believe in, it really doesn't matter. What matters is how large is the market getting? Why is the market getting this large? And then what are the key software players? Because I believe that if this is a problem that is particularly constructed via data, what software players are going to be there to be able to analyze that data and be able to make sense of that data in a meaningful way? The growing environmental concerns, whether it's from a particular political administration or whether it's from consumers that simply don't want to consume products that haven't been environmentally accounted for, is growing. I mean, that's not going away. And I may joke about plastic straws here and there and paper straws and how annoying they are, and I don't think that's necessarily the best way to be able to resolve some of these climate change issues. But nonetheless, things like this are going to happen more and more. I mean, 10 years ago, you would never imagine not using a plastic straw, right? So because these concerns are becoming more prevalent, and because these concerns are going to inject themselves through the very fabric of how every company operates, think of reports on slavery, right? Palantir has to put out a report that none of their products are being used by slave labor because there are still parts of the world where slavery is going on, unfortunately, right? All of these companies have to show, and not just from a, woke ESG perspective, but more so from a like, yo, can you at least prove to us that your iPhones are not being made by slaves? Like, that would be nice, Apple, to know, right? Like, now the philosophical paradox, which we don't have to get into here, is people will probably still buy those iPhones because of the nature of how we live in the developed world versus developing worlds, and that gets into a larger discussion. But the point is, most of us want to know that those iPhones aren't created by slave labor, and companies are put under pressure to be able to disclose this stuff. My larger point here is that if we're getting into a growing macroeconomic environment over the next decade where this stuff actually impacts the bottom line of companies, then you want to see Palantir tackling that problem, which is undoubtedly a big data problem, in as many different sectors as they can. I'm not going to go through it here, but if you go on Palantir's website and you click on renewable energy, they have so many different segments of how they're attacking renewable energy, how they're providing different platforms and vehicles essentially for companies to be able to track their emissions and understand what they're doing and do the transition to renewable that Palantir wants them to be able to get to. And quite frankly, if Palantir is working with oil companies to be more efficient, oil companies are less wasteful. If you're working with BP, because BP messed up pretty dramatically back in 2008 with the Gulf oil spill, then and BP has a better understanding of their data, BP is not going to have those types of oil spills anymore, hopefully, and so there's going to be less waste, even if you're not literally transitioning BP, which is an oil company, to renewable energy. So this partnership with Trafigura, launching first for metals in June of 2022 or May 2022, now launching for the energy sector, is very, very interesting because you could imagine a company like Trafigura is going to be more important and relevant over the next decade, or even companies like them, which means the platform that Palantir is developing with Trafigura should become more important and relevant over the next decade. And then it just becomes a question of how they're able to monetize that. And so if they're attacking a problem that's going to exist, if we know climate change is an issue and people want to be able to resolve it and companies ultimately care about it, whether you care about it or not, then every company that makes any product that has to track the carbon emissions of their global supply chain will need some type of a platform like Palantir. And the other interesting point here is this is exactly what Palantir did in the healthcare space. Or it's what Palantir is trying to do in the healthcare space. Their partnership with Cardinal Health was basically a partnership to be able to track the supply chain of hospital goods, think needles, masks, etc., going into certain administrations and making sure that like all these vendors are put into one database so that the hospitals actually have all the goods that they need. That's a hard thing to do. And you could argue that other hospitals across the world, other hospital like conglomerates, are going to adopt supply chain platforms like that because it will make the hospitals better. Same exact concept in the context of climate change, commodities, carbon emissions reports, what they're doing with Trafigura. I think there's going to be a massive market for this in the future for them to be able to collaborate and show it off in a lot of different ways. I mean, energy is just something I'm so bullish on when it comes to Palantir. Final thing I want to say here is Trafigura is likely one of the clients in the 400 that's using AIP. I would imagine, Palantir has 400 out of 421 customers in the pipeline to be able to use AIP. Trafigura is a commodities house that has created a carbon emission supply chain platform. So either Trafigura is using AIP and kind of interacting with the ontology essentially that they created with Palantir, right, with the Palantir operating system a year ago in a unique way, or the subsidiaries that are using the supply chain platform that Palantir and Trafigura built together might be getting a demo of AIP. And this is where we get the downstream effect of Palantir has launched all these partnerships with larger companies, but the smaller contractors, whether they're defense contractors or smaller subsidiaries that are working underneath that company, are probably the ones actually using the software on a day-to-day. If they can get those people to try out AIP and see what it feels like and really get a handle of what it means like to engage with the data, because they already have Foundry, which is already giving your ontology, so it's already streamlining the effects of why AIP will be relevant to them, we potentially might see a lot more customers on AIP in the future if Palantir can just upsell all the existing partnerships they have to, get into AIP. So those are my thoughts. Brand new extension of a partnership by Palantir and Trafigura. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you made it so far to the end of the video, please leave a comment with the word gas, because we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions. I look forward to the comments. Thank you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one.